Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. And welcome to today's webinar. I really hope your week is going well. My name is Rachel Evans, and I'm the Vice President of Marketing for TalentNet. We're delighted to be able to host two phenomenal speakers from the talent acquisition industry today to share their insights and knowledge on direct sourcing, from strategy to implementation and beyond. I'd like to introduce our speakers today, starting with Mark Condon, Managing Partner with QuantumWork Advisory. Mark is a pioneer in HR tech and services with over 20 years global experience in startups and large multinationals. His advisory projects bring a disciplined, data-driven approach interwoven with user-centric frameworks based on design thinking principles. Dedicated to lifelong learning, Mark has completed an MBA degree in psychology and HR and executive education with MIT, HBS, and IDEO. And over to our next speaker, Brian Spour, Vice President of Customer Success for TalentNet. Brian is responsible for TalentNet's customer consulting and advisory services, which include program readiness and customer success. These two practices span from upfront program design through to ongoing program oversight and continuous improvement for all of TalentNet's active clients. Before joining TalentNet, Brian worked extensively within staff augmentation and resourcing operations, where he gained deep knowledge of strategic workforce management. Brian's experience centered heavily within IT projects in Canada, maintaining a focus on operational excellence and efficiency. Since joining TalentNet, he has established and led TalentNet's most successful direct source programs, and now uses the knowledge gained from those experiences to guide clients in the design and delivery of their programs. Today's webinar is going to cover direct sourcing. Well, what is direct sourcing? Direct sourcing entails a company leveraging its employer brand, technology, and processes to systematically attract and curate a private database of contractor candidates organized into talent pools to then place as contractors quickly and efficiently. The format of today's webinar will be one of a roundtable Q&A with our speakers. We will leave time at the end for audience questions. If you have questions, please feel free to submit them via the chat function at any time during today's webinar. Should we run out of time for questions, all questions and responses will be prepared and sent out to all attendees post-event. We will also be sending out a complimentary white paper covering today's topics, which we hope will help you in your direct source journey. Now let's get started. So Mark, why is direct sourcing such an important strategy now? And has direct sourcing become even more important in the wake of the Great Resignation?
Yeah, Rachel, it's a really important question at the moment. And I bear with me while I go through this bit of history lesson with the listeners. The first one is, the premise is that the contingent and extended workforce has made a big shift. We're up to around 47% of the workforce. And we really can't ignore this. So it's, if you think you're in HR or procurement or a CEO, you can't really ignore 50% of your workforce anymore. So if that premise follows, then you've got to say, well, how do I control that best? And direct sourcing is a definite strategy to get on top of that. So and then you go, well, Mark, why is it? Are you sure this isn't going to flip back and then be 30 or 40%? The reason is, this is almost an economic adjustment we're going through at the moment. In the 80s, it was all about shareholder value. Employees lost power. People made money through shares, right? Their real wages fell. Productivity was still so deviated for the first time in the 80s, and has been a mile apart until very recently. So what's happening now is workers only have one choice, right? You withdraw your labor. There's no union power. There's no regulatory power. So all you do is resign and you go and find another job. Well, the other thing that's happening now is workers have more power. So they say, well, maybe I won't go and do a permanent job. I'll do a contract job. The extended workforce so that's the sort of consumer side of the employees. On the employer side, they're going, all right, I had a premise that I used to have all my people in the office and they used to be FTEs, and that's how I get productivity. Well, that premise doesn't work. In 21, a lot of companies had their best financial year ever, and with a completely remote workforce. So that whole thing is out the window. So now people are saying, all right, I might employ or I might engage a workforce in a different way, which would be more contract labor. So then you go, all right, contract labor is really important. How do I control my contract labor quality? Well, direct sourcing, because of the ability to do it faster, to get technology involved, and to manage that workforce intake has to be on anyone's agenda. I don't know, Brian, I don't know what your thoughts are, but that's obviously I'm pretty passionate about that.
Certainly, I think when it comes to direct sourcing, one of the things that really jumps out to me around people and engaging with the brands that they want to work with or don't want to work with, the concept of every employee or contractor being a potential customer really reigns true. And the first impression that a company makes in the process of engaging with talent that's in the market looking for their next role, whether it be FTE or through contracting, that impression really matters, and it sets the tone for what that person will expect in terms of working with that company. So meeting candidates where they're looking for their next role is something that really has shifted. Technology today versus technology 20 years ago, and people aren't looking through the newspaper for help wanted ads. Technology enablement, certainly I hold a bias for technology enablement being from the TalentNet point of view on this conversation, but I think the reality of having jobs available, contracts available for where people are going to be looking for them is going to be putting whoever the job seeker is and the employer at a better benefit, because you'll be having the same conversation and starting from a point of understanding with each other.
Yeah,
Good. Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Brian, and thanks, Mark. Right now with direct sourcing, we've talked about it's here. There's a greater need for contingent labor. I think that's really become an exploding topic for so many industries. But we always have, I think, as leaders in any of our respective departments, a need to have to build business cases for these things. If we want to implement something new, some new processes, new procedures, possibly some spend even. Mark, what are you thinking? Do you have any ideas for leaders who are wanting to implement a direct sourcing program within their organizations? What advice do you have for building a business case for that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of technical arguments for it. I mean, it's pretty self-evident that you're trying to get control of the quality of 40%, potentially 47 or 50% of your workforce coming into the organizations. I mean, that's pretty fundamental to say, look, if you said to the CEO, we don't have quality control over the intake of 50% of the people coming into our organization, they'd fall off their chair, right? So it's pretty basic. But at a more technical level, there's things like cost. I mean, replacing, in some cases, cost can be really attractive and can add up to millions of dollars. The ability to control the user experience or the moments of truth through the process that Brian was talking about, I mean, that's crucial. Look, how are you best to control your brand and moments of truth? Well, do it yourself. I mean, that's pretty fundamental. Access to quality of the people. If you feel like you may be second or third on the pecking order and that you're not really getting the quality, then taking control of it. D&I is a massive one. We're all passionate about that. Is how do you improve the D&I of the extended workforce? Once again, 47%. That you can't just leave that to chance as well. So look, coming back to it, I think the methodology for getting the business case together is don't go too narrow. Like, don't do it on cost or D&I, although that's really important. But you're going to have different constituents. So if you do it on cost and you're in the procurement department, you think, well, here's millions of dollars to save, and you build the business case and you don't engage the broader population, you might find that the CIO isn't pleased with that because they're not going to have access to the quality of technical talent that they need. HR may not be impressed that D&I is not being represented so I think you've got to have a broad-based business case. And I think you have to engage your stakeholders early. So don't try and push something at them that's already predetermined, but get them early, get them into the conversation, and help them be part of the design process rather than give it to them as a fait accompli at the end, where all they've got to do is choose it or not. And human nature being what it is, they may not choose it. So I think go through that process, and then there's a couple of questions that I've just jotted down. So has the vision and objectives and the end state been articulated? Are we really clear what we're trying to create here? Is it clear that there's a strategic need, and is it aligned to the business strategies of the company? Don't isolate it tactically. As we said before, having 47% of the population without any controls and intake, CEO, that's a C-level issue. And then what does success look like? Who will benefit? What does that look like, and how do we measure it? And then being really clear about the internal, external forces that are causing that change. We just talked about external, but sometimes there's really strong internal shifts of transformation. And then what's the investment support that is required? And don't try and do that on the side. Go get the money, get a clear plan, do it properly. Brian, I probably spoke too long, but what do you think?
I wholeheartedly agree with the entire perspective. I think when it comes to any company's strategy or approach from a business case perspective, it's important to identify the audience. If you don't know who you're talking to, how do you know what they're going to care about? Yeah. So the way that you articulated that, and understanding the various parts of the business who are going to be involved in making a decision as to whether direct sourcing is right for their company or not, it's important to speak their language. The old 3 points that typically reign true is cost, quality, and time. If you can weave those into the story, certainly there's something in there for almost every audience when it comes to a business case. But I think as we move towards people-centric business cases, the idea that we're considering talent and individuals, it's important to factor in other things than cost, quality, and time to the business, but rather also what are you providing to the external labor force for contractors. If you want access to talent, it's no longer a one-sided handshake. You also need to provide them with enough information about the job and the environment and what it is that they can expect when working with you as a company. The idea that you're just going to post a role and you're going to be flooded with candidates no matter what that are of top quality without the appropriate process for vetting. You need to also consider the approach that your process is going to take once that person is engaged. So weaving in cost, quality, and time into the narrative that is going to be the overall offering of direct sourcing certainly is critical, because we found in launching programs, if you center your mandate around cost savings, you may be ignoring or neglecting key elements that are going to be giving you that access to talent, or that good candidate experience that you're going to be getting those candidates coming back and re-engaging and redeploying people over time, which effectively reduce your costs if you're able to re-engage those candidates over time. So not everything boils down to what you find on the spreadsheet. And I think that there's a lot more leaders that are recognizing that dollars and cents aren't always just what you spend or what you save on a spreadsheet, but rather the experience that's going to be driving efficiency through the process. Time is money, as they say. And the more you can do proactively to get the right people in your pipeline and the right candidates engaged for when a role does come out, those are the things that we're seeing in time to productivity and reducing time to fill with candidates, because they're in that community, they're in your ecosystem before you necessarily need them to be on site tomorrow. So there's certainly the overall narrative there in terms of what the two sides of the equation are going to be, both the company expectation and the candidate expectation, is important to consider in this modern world of interacting with people.
Yeah, good points.
Yeah, good. Yeah, definitely some good points there around how to build that business case internally from all the different perspectives and angles. Now, once, of course, we've built a business case, we then have to move on to program design. We've got the buy-in. We know that the organization is behind the initiative. But Mark, I know you've got some great experience in work tech generally, and service design consulting. So do you have some ideas on process or methodology that you might recommend to our audience on how to design the best program moving forward with your direct sourcing initiative?
Yeah, I do, thankfully. Look, I think design thinking is sometimes thought of as a bit of a nice to have. We've made it integral to how we, everything we do with design. We see ourselves as a design company. We just happen to be really good at the human capital spectrum, talent acquisition, contingent worker management. So, but we take it through the lens of design's really important. Effective design in a services environment makes it more efficient, removes bottlenecks, makes it easier and more enjoyable. Like the standard should be for the team and for the candidates and everyone. Look, it should be enjoyable. That's the benchmark you're trying to get to. And the technology today makes it, that's the benchmark for technology. If it doesn't have a great user interface and it's not enjoyable, and we'll talk about that later, but that threshold. So a couple of methodology or framework is really a traditional empathy, define, ideate, prototype, and test and verify. So I'll just go through them quickly. But empathy is really understand what the current processes are and the current methodology for talent coming into an organization. So, because that's sort of what you're competing against. You're competing against the processes that are there and to some degree the agencies that are providing and supporting them. So if you're going to go and build an internal function, you've got to be as good as some of the best agencies, right? So that's the standard that you need to get to. So empathy builds an understanding of processes, the user experience, and particularly the friction points and flaws, because then you're building your future state model against that to address that. That could be, for certain people, reporting. It could be data management. It could be speed. It could be multiple steps that you want to streamline and make into one. So when you're building the model, you're not just replacing like for like. You have an opportunity to build a better widget, right? So with the technology that's there, and get a win. Making sure you define the problem statement. So what problem are you trying to fix, and really getting everyone to sign off on that. If it's if you, as I said, engaging the CIO or their department, the HR department and different stakeholders, using that as to socialize the problem. Like, what are you trying to address here? We talked about D&I, we talked about quality of talent, speed, cost, making sure we holistically deal with that. And then it's, when you're doing the design, getting people involved in the ideation process. So using the power of your organization to have a fun time looking at, well, here's 2 or 3 models. It might be build an internal team and partner with a curation company, or to extend the current MSP. So there's different configurations that you would look at and get people involved in helping make those decisions. And then really build out a design blueprint, people, process, and technology, so that you know what the interactions are. And then importantly, don't rush to the end answer. Make sure you test and verify. Spend a few weeks almost not trying to destroy it, but really prove out, is this the right model for us? And as a result, that scientific inquiry will go a long way to your stakeholders embracing it, because it doesn't look like you're selling a particular model. It looks like it's gone through a really clear process of scientific design and inquiry. So I've probably gone on a bit long, but and then the only what I think would say is, you don't have to boil the ocean. You don't have to build a model for the entire workforce. Pick off the segments that you want to look at, and also do the skills planning to make sure this is where the best bang for buck is. It's, here's the strategy. These are the skills we're going to need in the future. These are the ones we're really struggling with the current model. It could be compliance, it could be developer skills, it could whatever it is. So, Brian, not sure whether I covered it or not.
The way that I would call it practically apply that concept is the way that we've seen the direct sourcing programs that have been stood up so far is the concept of plug and play, standardization. It's certainly important, but I think it might be a little bit misleading to say that you can plug and play a direct sourcing model without thinking about it, right? Like, we know that there are best practices. We know that there are certain things that are drivers for success and detractors from success. But the reality of plugging anything into an organization is that every company is going to be different. So you need to practically apply those best practices to how they're going to be best achieved or accepted within your organization. And even if 90% or more of the topics that we cover in launching a direct sourcing program across clients are the same, the nuance with which they're applied or the nomenclature that's used to describe them to the different stakeholders needs to be tailored to the company. And so when thinking about the design of and best practices of a program, it really is taking what we know to be a driver of success and then communicating with the people who know it best within that organization or are closest to it. So that might be one stakeholder, or it might be a large set of stakeholders, depending on the company, depending on the structure, depending on the culture within that organization. So I think when we're really designing and thinking about designing it, it matters a lot in terms of who you engage and when you engage them and how involved they are. The other adage that I liked, one of our clients, as we stood up a program, made the comment that their culture is that they like to move quickly and break things early. And that speaks to what you talked about, Mark, the concept of it's not a set it and forget it process ever. You want to put your best foot forward, but then continuously evaluate it and see where the ends of that pressure cooker can start to see cracks and where you see you've got the most success. So understanding that your first idea might not be the only idea that drives success in your company, keeping a continuous eye on it and measuring the things that matter most over time typically lend to the most success and sustainable program.
Yeah, good points.
Good. Thanks, Brian and Mark. Yeah, I just want to take a quick moment for anyone who has joined late. We're going to be doing our Q&A session here for about the first 40 minutes of today's webinar, but leaving some time at the end for questions. So if you have any questions, audience members, please do submit them via the chat function here. I see a couple have come in, so thanks for that. And just keep it going. If we do run out of time to answer all of your questions, we will be following up by email with a summary of all the questions and answers, and also sending a complimentary white paper. I mentioned that at the beginning, but for those that joined late, just wanted to bring that up again. So great. Let's move over. I know we've started with Mark on a lot of the questions so far, and they've been amazing answers. So thank you, Mark. Brian, I know you have a ton of experience working with the structure of direct sourcing teams, really talking about the commonalities or even the unique features of what each of those structures may look like. What are some of the various models that organizations have to select from, and how do companies choose which one or ones to implement?
That's a great question, and one that we go through in every single conversation with a new client, prospective client, somebody who's interested in the topic. This is a really important one to get right. The people who are logging in the morning and are going to be the ones that are actually doing the work to make the program run are the most critical piece of any program. And there's a lot of different ways to approach that. One of the most common questions is, do you do it internally, or do you bring on a third-party partner to be the one to execute for you? Major consideration here is going to be cost. Does a company want to assume the cost of having those people on their full-time payroll, or would you prefer spend the cost on the traditional pay-per-use type of adding that fee into your markup? So one way or another, I want to be really realistic about the fact that direct sourcing, although it can be a cost savings initiative, does take a significant amount of investment. And the people who are going to be doing the job and making that program save you a lot of money do cost money to operate. So the idea of the right size team, the right blend of skill sets that need to exist within any one program is really important. And you can do that very effectively internally or with a third-party partner. Some of our most successful programs have done it one or the other way. They've both been very successful. I think what's really important to understand too is the team, the skill set that exists is not a brand new skill set. The concept of people engaging with high-skilled workers, being able to evaluate and vet and qualify the right candidate to put in front of a hiring manager certainly is facilitated in a big way through technology enablement. The engagement process with candidates, the top of funnel elements certainly are facilitated through third party or through technology enablement. But at the end of the day, what we've seen most effectively is having a human interact with the other human to really identify a culture fit, skill set fit, all of the things that are really important for a company when they're considering who to bring on, whether it's full-time or contract. So structuring a team, you need to have the right people and the right skill sets. So qualifying a role with the manager, understanding, getting to the nitty-gritty of what the composition of the team is, what the objectives of the project are. That skill set might not be the same skill set as understanding how to compliantly run a job posting through the approvals process from a finance and HR perspective. So that recruitment-centric mentality, that really passion and drive for getting the right information and qualifying a role up front is certainly one that you need to put a high emphasis on. And then the people who are interacting with the candidates, vetting for skills, you may need to consider what the breadth of your skill sets are within your program. Because if you're doing everything from light industrial to high-end technology, the same person might not be best suited to vet all of the candidates along that spectrum. So from a team size perspective, it's also important to understand the skill set perspective and the topic of expertise that person needs to understand. So when you're, I know I'm talking a lot in concept here, but when you get to the nitty gritty of understanding what your program needs in terms of the volume of candidates within each skill set, the geographies within each skill set, I think if we're looking at one single country, it's a lot easier to recruit these days in a vast geographical footprint. But if you're going across markets, if you're going across an ocean, it's not necessarily going to be the same person that understands that local market. So keeping a global perspective on it, one centralized team versus regional experts are certainly something that you want to consider. And it's really getting to the core of the question is, how do you structure a direct sourcing team? It depends on what your needs are, but the things that the prevailing theme is, you need to have the right people to understand your skill sets, the right people to understand your processes, and the right number of people to fulfill on what your program goals are. And you can do that in-house. You can do that with a third-party provider. But I think the most important thing in that context is that expectations are clear up front for what that team is going to need to deliver on, both for you to understand what you're needing to bring on, but also from their perspective on how they build out that structure.
Great. Yeah. Thanks, Brian. Mark, anything to add there in terms of the various models and how companies may choose?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be brief. I think Brian's covered most of it. I mean, a company has a choice of, to build it in-house. If they've got an MSP or they're bringing in an MSP, then to add that curation component to them. And some of them are, awesome at it. So why have more partners? Or it's a specialist curation group that's out there, or it's a combination of all of them, and if you're a really large, I know a Fortune 50 that has all of those models, and then it's sort of an experiment, isn't it? Like which one wins and who's the most productive, as well as I think underestimating how good some of the agencies are is a mistake. So, if particularly in a really high demand area, some of these organizations have built up incredible skills and so forth. So you've got to go in eyes wide open and build an elite team within your group. So, attract the right people, pay them the right way, have a culture to motivate them, have a high performance culture, because it's all about speed, right? So the curation part of it can be done over a period of time, but as soon as that rec's open, you've got hours, days, that you don't have weeks. So that curation of talent's really crucial. And you need great processes, and you need great tech. So that would be some of the things I'd be looking at in design components, and be honest with the capability that you think you can build within your brand. The other part is brand. How strong is your brand at attracting talent? And if you've got a great brand, you probably aren't really monetizing it if you don't have a direct sourcing program. Like if you're not leveraging that in the extended workforce is potentially a bit of a miss. But eyes wide open, build the right team, do it properly, and you'll get the results. So I think that's sort of my message.
Good. Thanks, Mark. And I think, Brian, you already touched on this, but was wondering if you had anything else to add. In terms of designing that model for direct sourcing strategy, what do you need to think about when it comes to candidate types? Should there be different strategies for different candidate types, or can you kind of run one strategy to capture everyone?
Yeah, I think that's a very fair question to ask. And I think the answer is not every single skill set or type of candidate or industry is going to have identical recruitment practices. I don't think you need to reinvent the wheel every time you add a new skill set to your program necessarily, but I think it's important to consider what you're targeting. I mentioned, the concept of light industrial to the high-end technology roles. Part of what you're going to see in that same market of that same spectrum in the market is not everybody, depending on the skill set that they're in, is going to be actively seeking out a role. So there's a lot of scenarios where your curation team, whether it's internal or external, is going to need to be proactive in going out and finding that talent. I think to pull from an example from the local market that I sit in Minneapolis and the Twin Cities, the UI UX design market has negative unemployment. So those people aren't actively pounding the pavement, so to speak, on what their next role is going to be, because they're gainfully employed and they get to set their prices to a certain degree. So your curation strategy when engaging with that talent needs to be a little bit different than higher turnover skill sets or more commoditized skill sets that your company's going to be recruiting for. So I think when looking at structuring your team or direct sourcing strategy, I think it's important that we don't necessarily have to go back to our end-to-end workflow and redesign it if we're adding in UI UX, to pull on the example I've been going with. But there are certain moments in those interactions where the expectation on the curation team and the engagement strategy for that type of candidate needs to be nuanced. And I've probably beat this drum a little bit too much already, is that understanding the expectation and understanding what your program is looking to achieve is going to help you up front make those determinations and set those expectations with the team that's going to be sourcing for those skill sets.
Great. Thanks. Thanks, Brian. Mark, anything to add on that point?
Yeah, Brian hits on a really good point. The drivers for the program will directly link to the risk reward that you're prepared to take, because the ROI is generally high margin, high demand categories, right? So if you've got high volume in that space, that's where, if you're going after costs, you sort of have to go hard to get that saving. But if you've got the CIO, they're probably going, hang on, be careful of my supply of talent, because if you disrupt that. So I think it's really understand what you're trying to build, and then build a team that mirrors that strategy. So if it says, all right, we're gonna be really good at deploying or curating UX, to Brian's point, that might be a really bad idea. I mean, it might be, look, the ROI is not great. We're not going to be brilliant at it. We don't have enough volume, and my CEO's, going to be knocking on my door and be very unhappy with me. So, but there might be other skill sets like, more mundane technology roles or more commoditized roles that you can do that. And it might be lower level developer roles or those that aren't as specialized, aren't as experienced, and you want to curate and fill the middle bands of those roles. So those are just some of the nuances. So I think the key is understand your workforce, understand the demand for those roles in the market, and understand the difficulty or the challenge and the ROI of filling those roles, and make sure that's balanced with your overall objectives for the program. If it's all about cost, that's going to drive certain behaviors. If it's about a balance of quality, or if it's just about quality and D&I, that's going to have a different result, a different team structure than those. So I think be really clear on your strategic initiatives and make sure that your governance group keeps signing up to that, because the default is always cost. You know, everything comes back to cost. You say, hang on here, this is about, our pillars here are improving D&I quality within an extended workforce. It's having access to great talent, and then cost was equal. So I think it's just making sure that everything's in balance.
Great. Thanks, Mark. Shifting gears over to technology, you know, the world we live in, filled with technology, and in many of our organizations, especially large organizations, a lot of legacy systems still in play, you know, the VMS systems, ATS systems. I'd love to hear your thoughts, Mark. Let's go back to you. What technology functionality do you think is actually really critical for a successful direct sourcing program, kind of given the state of affairs of the existing technology architecture that may be in place today within organizations,
Yeah.
and or just the basic candidate experience expectations?
Yeah, so good question. And understanding the legacy environment is really important. The VMS is, you know, the technologies are very good at what they do, but they don't source, they're not a sourcing tool. They're more tracking and management of the interaction between an agency environment and the internal environment. And they do it, and some of them do it really, really well. But for direct sourcing, obviously you need to source. Pretty obvious. And you need a really good platform for that. The other part of direct sourcing that's important is you're not sourcing in necessarily real time. You need to curate a group. You can obviously do some in real time, but your strategy needs to be building communities, building relationships, building engagement with talent in advance of the requisition need, because to that point, you only have hours, days to fill. And if you haven't done 80% of the work in advance, you're not going to be able to fill a role. So thankfully, technology makes that job a lot easier. It's less people intensive than it was years ago or even months ago with the rate of technology. So firstly, some principles. Great functionality without great user interface is a waste of time. Those days are over. So, you know, don't have, you know, IT can't just push technology at users and say it works really well. Here's all the requirements. Here's all the functionality. Yes, it's a bit clunky, but you'll get through it. That doesn't happen anymore. So it has to be, is enjoyable the bar? Probably. It has to be easy. The profile builder. So talent needs to be able to build a profile. They need to be nudged when a requisition comes in. It's a bit like the Amazon principle when you shop. You constantly getting nudged for buying things that you probably shouldn't, but you do anyway. Having that sort of consumer experience is really important because people are trained in it. They're already used to it. They expect to be nudged on, oh, here's a job for you. You know, this sort of suits your criteria. People don't mind that type of marketing. They're used to it. Direct sourcing. So direct sourcing is not one thing or another. It's omni-channel. It's a big word, but it just means everything. Everything's open. So we need good access to social channels. We need great access to job boards, traditional job boards, which are still effective, even though, you know, it's a little bit more, it's a bit harder to get great talent that way. The other one is search, match, rank. AI is a game changer for these technologies because previously you'd have to look through hundreds of records. You'd have to have a person evaluate. And as we've seen, people aren't great at that task. It's repetitive. It can be pretty boring. And it's important. So being able to really classify talent through AI tools to direct search, directly match and rank with scoring. And the scoring should be based not on just skill sets, but how the person interacts with you and the brand. So ideally you're getting both a score for skills, but also how they interact with you, website or jobs or previous history. That should add to the score ideally. Marketing, ideally there's the ability within the tools to do marketing campaigns, or that they can integrate to those tools. really well for drip campaigns and things like that. So those tools are really available. If they're not within the platform you want, they can be integrated pretty easily. So that's another thing. The talent community we talked about. Without the community, you really don't have a direct sourcing program. And the other one's really important is job intelligence. So what's the cost of the resources versus the market, and making sure that's always in alignment. And that's not easy at the moment because it's happening by the day, that rates are going up. And so that's a constant one, it's all right to fill a couple of roles, but if you're filling thousands of them and you're 5% out all the time, either over or under, you're going to cause big issues with costs and availability of talent. But there's some of the ones. Brian's probably got a whole bunch of others, but they're the ones I would look for. And we use frameworks and make it really clear scientifically how technologies score on that. So you want to get away from opinion when you're selecting technology. You want to score it, and you want to rank it, and you cross compare. Brian, sorry.
I certainly could talk about the technology component of this all day long. I think, though, one of the things you want to make sure when you're evaluating a technology, and understanding that you don't need to be an expert in technology and understand development languages and the nuances of machine learning and how it's going to be orchestrated in the background, to be able to understand what matters most to your company and your candidates and your curation team when you're selecting a technology. So the way that I think about this is three main moments that the technology enables that is going to be making the biggest difference for any one given program. That moment that is the attraction and engagement of candidates. And I put those two words together because you can attract all of the people in the world, but if they don't engage with your company, your brand, your job, whatever it is, to indicate to you that they're interested or provide you enough information that you can interact with them later on, that attraction component has fallen short. So what is the technology doing to be able to attach the content to the candidate in a way that's going to have them interact with it? So that attract and engage moment. Next, the qualify and organize. Somewhere in the middle of the process of posting a job and selecting a candidate, those candidates need to be evaluated, qualified. Somebody needs to make the determination if they're the proper candidate to go across to the hiring manager to say yes or no to. And inside of that technology moment, there's a ton of stuff. I think that's really where the bulk of the buzzwords come into play these days. And I caution the crowd against getting trapped in the buzzword trap. Not all machine learning is the same. Not all SMS functionality is the same. Understanding from a functional perspective, what is it actually doing? What is it that the technology is doing in that moment of engaging and organizing or qualifying and organizing? Is your curation team able to organize your candidates into talent pools? What are the criteria that they're allowed to sort and filter by? What is that search and match function going to be doing? Mark, you did a really good job of articulating on that, the idea of being able to get to the core of what you're looking for in a candidate through technology. It certainly does facilitate that process, and there's a lot of really high value activity that the technology can help to expedite.
Yeah.
I'm a big proponent, and it might sound counterintuitive being from the technology side here, that I don't believe that technology is meant to replace the personal interaction in this process, but instead facilitate getting to the core and making that process easier for both sides, both people on both sides of that process. Then the last moment really is the facilitation of the process. What is the technology doing to remove friction across that process for everybody involved? What clicks does a candidate need to do to find your job, create an application, create a profile? What are the clicks that they need to do to essentially indicate interest in your company or your job? Then what are the things that a curator is going to be doing, and how are they going to be evaluating a candidate? But then also, how do they get that candidate from point A to point B, which is in front of the hiring manager?
Okay.
There's a lot of process automation. There's a lot of prompts and notifications, and we're all so used to technology that we have preconceived notions about what works and when do we want to be prompted and what do we care about to be told about. So how does the technology fit into people's expectations of making their jobs and their lives easier, but not being cumbersome? Because we've all gotten to the point where we have so many notifications in a day that they're diluted in value. So what are the key things that we're honing in on to making relevant to those people involved in the process? It's important to not just open the fire hose necessarily if that's not what people want. So automating that process, facilitating that process, removing friction from everybody, and hopefully that makes the experience better, but also can make the time that whole system takes be reduced in the long run.
Yeah. Can I just jump in on that one, Brian? Because you raised a couple of good points. One, I think by doing the friction points identification in the current state, you'll get credit for fixing it. If you don't have it documented, you won't get the credit. Does that make sense? So your product and some of the things that it's going to get rid of some friction points just because it's good technology. But if you haven't established that baseline, people can't say you don't get the owners of the program won't get a win out of it, saying, look, here's a problem, we identified it and we fixed it. And so there's the other one. And the other one is I totally agree with the point about where people are used in the process. It's not necessarily that upfront bulk screening. It's really engagement of the talent and a brand ambassador role, and also making sure that the fit's right culturally as well. I mean, all those softer issues are what humans do really well. Looking at lots of data really quickly, technology does that really well. So I think it's sort of getting that perfect blend of the two. Thought I'd just jump in on that one. Sorry, Rachel.
Yeah, no, great. Thanks for that. That was good. And also kind of tackling things like candidate bias. And I know we've been doing some work also with another partner around that piece and anonymizing and redacting, candidate application resumes. So some good work being done in that area as well. We've got a few minutes left before we're going to jump to our audience questions. I see we have some great questions come in. So thank you, audience. If there's any more, please, get them onto the chat message box right now so we can cover them for you. But let's close, Brian and Mark. Brian, maybe I'll start with you. In your view, are there really just some high level, maybe 2 or 3 keys to success in setting up a direct sourcing program, just to kind of summarize for the audience?
Certainly. And if we get down into the nitty gritty of what sets a program up for success, there's a lot of things to consider. But if we're hitting the highlights of top 3 success factors, I think we talked about it earlier, the people involved in that process. Who are your partners? Are you building your team internally, or are you going to be using a third-party partner? Having a clearly identified expectation for volumes and KPIs and a measurement of that group is really going to be important. Next up, the whole concept of program governance is critical. So who are you meeting with? How often are you evaluating your KPIs? What are the key elements that you want to be tracking over time? And how is that properly being articulated to those that care about it? Not all data points are relevant to all people at all times, but it's important as you try to continuously improve or grow the scope of your program within your company, that proper governance to make sure everybody's taking responsibility for their part of the process, but also then communicating up, down, left, right, whoever is relevant gets the right information. And then lastly, keeping the candidate top of mind in all of the design processes, starting with the end in mind in terms of engaging that candidate, keeping their perspective, keeping their experience at front of mind is really something that I think is critical in being able to scale this program in the modern world of engaging talent.
Great, thanks. And Mark, any other final thoughts? Just, kind of top 2 or 3 things to ensure direct source success.
I think I'll go back to the comment I made earlier about in the origins of the program, make sure that you are clear on what strategies what is the program trying to achieve. too often there's an assumption that it's about cost. And that can be a bit of a missed opportunity to engage different stakeholders within the organization, whether it's, D&I, the HR group, because ignoring 47% of the workforce doesn't make a lot of sense, right? So often they've got your badge, they walk in your buildings, they're facing customers, and they represent your brand, yet historically we've treated them sort of as second best, and that we have to change that now. So I think making sure it's really clear that these other drivers, sometimes people are a bit worried about pushing them because they feel a bit softer, but they're really important. And costs probably won't get the attention of a lot of organizations at the moment because they know, well, so you're gonna save some money when I'm desperate for talent. Like, hang on, what you're not on the same page here. So I think it's to say, look, we can get great talent, we can take more control of a really important part of the workforce to get access, and we can save some money. So I think it's just the emphasis on the syllable, if you know what I mean. So yeah, I think those are some of the things I'd refer to.
Great. Thanks, Mark, and thanks, Brian. Excellent Q&A session with you so far. We have some audience questions that I'd like to shift gears over there if we could. The first question from our audience members, really excellent one, and it's pertaining to the conversation of single doorway or one doorway in, if you will, where we start looking now at that single entry point for all candidates, regardless of job type, whether they're full-time, whether they're contract or contingent, even freelancers, and even looking at your internal talent. So how do you redeploy and manage your talent? Now, the question that had come in was, are you seeing companies begin to use direct sourcing / common talent pools for both temporary and permanent purposes? So certainly I think that's part of the story. The story is much greater than that. And I think there's been a lot of work done in the very recent past and much more to come. But maybe, Brian, I'll turn that over to you. I know this has been a topic, very hot topic at the moment. So maybe we'll start with Brian around his thoughts of how we use talent pools across the entire organization.
Incredible question. And I think it's really topical for the moment that we're in. I think that the concept of keeping a very strict divide between contingent contractors and full-time employees has been one that is, it's been steadfast for many years, up until very recently. And there's a spike in interest in terms of understanding my total talent. We've heard that buzzword. What is the entire blend of my workforce that is going to be executing on the tasks that need to be done on a day-to-day basis? And we're starting to see a lot of companies trying to deploy the same strategies for talent attraction on the full-time and contract side. And they're looking at bringing those together. So there are certain strategies around saying, we have this work to be done. It can, whether it's full-time or contract, the same pool of people out there, the same population that exists are going to be the ones executing on those jobs. So how can we blend our efforts and make those two strategies come together as one? And then one of the things that's gained popularity in a lot of the programs that we operate in is the concept of converting contractors to full-time. It seems like that safe, happy medium where you've started a clear path with the contractor at first, and then the decision is made to convert them. But that started to open a lot of our clients up to the concept of, why not start with the understanding that somebody could end up in one of two paths, as long as it's done in a compliant way. Compliance, we haven't really touched on it today, certainly a critical piece to doing this and executing on it properly. But long story short, yes, a ton of companies are talking about how do they do that? How do they start to merge those two strategies and do that in a way that's comfortable for candidates and compliant for their legal and compliance departments?
Yeah, Mark, over to you. Any thoughts on this? Single doorway, one doorway in. Thoughts?
Yeah, look, I think it's pretty obvious, isn't it? I mean, we just talked through the sort of analogy of, all right, I was a permanent employee, I've resigned, maybe I'll do a contract role, or maybe I'll do a permanent role, or maybe I'll apply for both. they're the same person. So to have a technology infrastructure that doesn't acknowledge that doesn't make a lot of sense. So I definitely see that as a huge priority. Part of it's going to be solved with, smarter, better platforms. Part of it will be through really good data strategy. So getting into the weeds on mapping data fields as well as tagging data. So there won't be a silver bullet for it all, but I think the devil's in the detail, and getting really into the data flow diagram level, understanding the strategy, and then making sure that the teams are trained in how to identify, all right, so this person's both in there as a permanent and a contract role. How do I manage that? So there's some business rules that have to be applied as well. And it's likely that at the moment, in a bigger organization, there's two different groups managing the permanent recruitment versus the direct sourcing. So how are they structurally going to be merged in the future? And then why would you have two marketing groups looking at targeting employees versus the extended workforce? So that doesn't make a lot of sense either. So there is specialization, but at some point these things have to come together, which I sort of term as universal workforce management. I think Total sort of says, well, it's all of it. The universal workforce management sort of feels like you have to integrate it, and it has to be seamless and make sense. It has to be an intelligent system, if that makes sense.
Yeah, good. And I think, from a customer experience perspective, certainly candidate experience generally, but we call it customer experience on the marketing side. We're used to now having, and I think, Mark, you mentioned omnichannel before, having the exact same experience, no matter how you interact with an organization. And we look at talent acquisition, we're not there yet, right? We're getting there. It's becoming a hot topic. Whereas, when we're marketing and actually selling products and services to customers, that's been a kind of top of mind for many years in marketing. So it's kind of an interesting paradigm shift, and certainly more to come here. But platforms like direct sourcing platforms, there's no question today, given if they have the appropriate APIs and connections into those legacy systems, right? You've got the VMS systems, the ATS systems, can in theory and technologically today replace even FMS systems, so Upwork, and sort of give more oversight into those aspects of your business as well. So a lot of good work being done there. And I think there's much more to come on that single doorway to really enhance the candidate experience, which takes us really into another great audience question. Are there any innovative ways to attract talent using direct sourcing other than traditional methods like driving social content and talent targeting campaigns on LinkedIn, offering enhanced employer referral programs, conducting alumni rehire campaigns, and offering compelling agency incentive programs? This audience member's company is in the life sciences, pharmaceutical, and the sector in which they're operating, they have very heavy competition. So I want to hand that. Maybe I'll start with Mark. Any ideas? We've got 2 minutes left. So this will be our final question.
Yeah.
Just any thoughts you have here?
That's a bit of a doozy, isn't it? I'd start with brand and how trying to measure the strength of the brand and how that can be strengthened as an employer or for the extended workforce. So I think that's fundamentals of content, advertising. There's some things that need to be done to strengthen that in the marketplace. The other one would be, I think the person sounds like they've got some great initiatives, but maybe it's the execution of those. So they say they've got a referral program, but is it digitized? Is it easy to execute? Has it been, is it an easy thing to do? Is it high profile, or is it an afterthought? In some organizations, marketing that heavily can bring about really, really good results. So there's a ton of things that can be done. It sounds like they're doing some really good things, but I'd be having a look at each of them and saying, look, can we digitize it? Can we make it easier? Can we market it better? And obviously, I'm not aware of what they're actually doing, but it sounds like they're doing some good stuff. But I'd say LinkedIn is sort of it's a great product, but it's where everyone else goes. So you're gonna have to think about other places where candidates hang out.
Good, thanks, Mark. And Brian, over to you. I'm sure you've got some thoughts on this quickly. We've got about a minute left, but let's take it home with this one.
For the sake of time, I'll be incredibly brief. And it's a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek answer. I think if you were to get one person from every generation that's in the workforce age right now into a room and ask them, how do you want to consume content? How do you want to engage with content? They're going to give you very different answers. And if your direct sourcing program has a way to connect with them relevant to each of their answers, you're doing something right. So whether it's digital marketing, whether it's using your hiring managers and providing them with a relevant link or content, an easy way for them to get to people directly. All of those things are relevant. We're not reinventing the wheel, but I think it's about engaging people with the way that they like to be engaged or receive content.
Yeah. The only thing I would throw to that person, in case they're still on, is there are some social tools that can be integrated, and they're really, really good. I won't name them, but there are a handful that are really good and improve D&I. So I think that's another thing to look at, is what tech can be integrated.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Brian, and thank you so much, Mark. What a great session and great questions from the audience. Wonderful responses. For those that are still on, this session has been recorded. We will be providing a link to the recording, as well as the questions and answers that will be emailed out to you, as well as the complimentary white paper. So again, thank you so much for joining today. It's been a real pleasure. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and hope to see you back again soon. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.